You couldn't think anything unless you were there before thinking. So you have to exist separate to and before your mind. Otherwise you couldn't have one. Can you put a t-shirt on if you don't exist to wear a t-shirt? No. If you want to wear a t-shirt, I'm sorry, but you have to exist first. That should be simple stuff, right? It's common sense. If you don't exist, you can't do it because you don't exist. Pretty straightforward. So if you want to think about anything, if you want to have thoughts, guess what? You exist first. Otherwise you can't think. That means you can't be thinking. You can't be thoughts. You can't be anything that's conceptual or within the mind. That means you have to exist before the mind. That means your consciousness. Not thoughts, consciousness. G'day folks, and welcome... G'day folks, and welcome to a little introductory lesson into some metaphysics. So the philosophy of metaphysics, or what things are, the nature of existence. The self you know is not the knowing self. For any self known is automatically just another separate thing being known by the knowing self. This was the most interesting responses, so we'll go through this little thread. This seems to be a complicated way to say that who I really am is separate from who I think I am. The problem, though, is calling my perception of myself another separate thing. I'm not sure we can separate our thoughts and perceptions from who we are, since they could not exist without us. Not being your thoughts is the point. Yet that statement is only the very surface level understanding. How can you not be separate from your thoughts of yourself? Try to explain how that could be possible. You can have a car and you can drive it. You are never the car, though. It's the same for any idea of yourself. You can have it, but you are not it. No, they're not the same. The car exists without you. Your thoughts cannot. We can exist without cars. Without thoughts, we cease to exist, according to Paul. But no, one could just the same say cars cannot exist without mankind. But that isn't the topic or focus. The focus is that each is a thing or object separate from the subject, which is the self. And to say you don't exist without thoughts isn't a very well thought out concept. You can be unconscious and you still exist. Paul says, I wrote we cease to exist, at least in this world. Your own rationale separates what we are from what our body is. Paul seemed to be very confused here. So, when unconscious, whatever makes up the we does cease to exist in this world. So, Paul is trying to put forth the idea that when you go to bed at night, or when you're knocked unconscious, you actually stop existing. You actually pop out of existence, and then you pop back into existence when you come conscious. And that's what materialists believe. And anybody who thinks that consciousness comes from your brain, or that your consciousness, yourself, your soul, your spirit, your mind, is somehow a product of your brain, when in reality, your brain is more like a radio, and the radio stations create the consciousness and your soul, your spirit, and it's just filtered through your brain. The same way you turn on the radio and you listen to different radio stations. The music isn't in the radio. In the same way, your mind isn't in your brain. But Paul's very confused here. He says, our body may remain, but we are not here to experience it. If you think it's not a well thought out concept, your complaint is first with René Descartes. Yeah, well, he's been proven wrong multiple times. The classic, everyone's heard this before. I think, therefore I am. And if I was around at the time and I was sitting down and had a conversation, I could have walked Descartes through this and he would have agreed with me. Because he would have been like, actually, no, you're right. And as well, if you actually look at proper translations and you don't just take the quote out of context, I think, therefore I am. Descartes was actually saying something closer to what I'm saying right now. The way he explained what he was trying to say by saying, I think, therefore I am, he himself in his own writings, in the same paper from where that quote comes from, he himself said that what he's trying to say is that we exist because we exist. Or I am because I am. And not necessarily thinking. He was talking, the way he explained thought was in a different way because of the way the ancient Greeks spoke about divine reason and the fact that consciousness was synonymous with mind initially. So to think something was to be something. Not in the way that we talk about thoughts and thinking today. We have a different way of interpreting these same words that we used even just a few hundred years ago in a different way. They meant different things a few hundred years ago. But if you actually read his explanations as to what he's trying to say, you'd know that. Because he explains that. So, the whole I think therefore I am, it doesn't actually mean that you have to think to exist. That's not what Descartes was saying with his philosophical analysis and breakdown. In short, we are thoughts. Without my thoughts, there is no me, Paul says. To be sure, there may still be a you and other things, like cars. So forms, objects in the external world, may still be around, but for me, I am an oblivion of unconsciousness. I am in the oblivion, temporarily or forever. So he honestly believes, and again, this is what materialists believe, okay? People who believe that you're not a soul, you're not a spirit, who lives through the body, in the same way you hop in a car and you drive the car, they think that somehow you come from, like your driving is a manifestation of the car, like your existence somehow magically comes from your brain, even though you have to exist to have a brain. But somehow they think that you had a brain first. In the void, you were just a brain, and then you thought existence into existence from your brain. But that obviously doesn't make any sense, because if you had to think yourself into existence, and that means you had to have a brain, well, where were you before existence? Before you thought yourself into existence as a thought, where did you exist? Obviously, you had to be consciousness. You had to be a spirit that thinks with a brain. You can't be a brain first. You have to be a spirit first that uses a brain, in the same way you drive a car. You can't just have a car magically from nowhere, from nothing. Same way you can't just have a brain in a void, just hanging in eternity. You just always existed as a brain in infinity, and then you just like think yourself. No, that makes no sense. Obviously, you're a spirit who incarnates into the body that has a brain, the same way a radio works. The radio waves go play, and then you turn on the radio and plays the radio station. But the radio station, the music isn't in the radio. In the same way, obviously, your spirit was already around before the body, and then your spirit plays through the body, the same way music plays through the radio. That's the only possible way it can work. You have to be stupid to think otherwise, or just not thinking it through properly. Again, as I pointed out before, if you think that your thoughts and you can't exist without thinking, then you haven't thought that concept through very well. Paul goes on to say, hence the problem with your car analogy. The car has an independent existence without the driver. But it doesn't. As I said before, cars can't exist without humans to make cars. Cars don't grow on trees. You have to have humans who make the cars. So there's no such thing as a car that exists independent of a human being. Because they don't exist unless man makes them. In the same way, your thoughts don't exist unless you think them. So it's a perfect analogy. The use of a car is the exact same as the use of your thoughts and thinking. It has to be you there first to create the thing. So it's a perfect analogy. You just have to open your brain, start thinking a bit, and you'll be able to see how it makes perfect sense. Our thoughts have no independence from us, and our existence as a separate being, as we define ourselves as, is dependent on our ability to think. So instead of trying to answer all of this confusing nonsense, I just put it plain and simple. You exist with or without thought. Paul says, then what is you? When you say I exist, what is I? And the thoughts that you say are not part of you, where do they come from that they can exist separate from you, like a car and driver? How could they exist separate of a self? That makes no sense at all. There cannot be thought or anything else without first a self who is the subject, aware of said thing. I am myself. Taz jumps in and says, yes, some clarity here would help greatly. And so I reply, clarity can only come from your own direct experience of the matter. Any concepts I share will only make it more confusing, as it's not something one grasps conceptually. So check your own experience now, okay? Everybody can do this, no matter who you are at any time in existence. Do you have a sense of self, which has been with you for your whole life? Something you call I. Do you ever say I am? And do you ever start a sentence with I am? Do you have a sense of self? Even though your idea of yourself, that what you think about yourself, is always changing and always has changed throughout your entire life. Your idea of who you are is when you're 5, you're not the same person as when you're a 10-year-old, and you're not the same person when you're 20 to when you are now. But the I am, the sense of self, when you start a sentence with the words I am, and you're talking about yourself, that is the same. That hasn't changed. From the day you were born until now, it's exactly the same. No change whatsoever. Paul goes on to say, the very fact that you can sense a self requires that you be a thinking being. Everyone, can we all do a collective face palm here? Slap. Requires that you be thinking being that can process your sense and name what you perceive as a self. After all, where is your sense of self if that self is unconscious and in mental oblivion? See, Paul's just explained how his own position makes no sense and how he's wrong. But he can't actually see that that's what he's done, because he lacks awareness. So if you're asleep, you stop existing, or at the dentist and put under, you actually die and no longer exist because you are unconscious? No. Slow down and think about what you're saying. How would you know any thought if you were not there before it arises to know it? You have to exist prior and independent the thought and the mind, else you couldn't know any thoughts. You couldn't think anything unless you were there before thinking. So you have to exist separate to and before your mind. Otherwise you couldn't have one. Like, can you put a t-shirt on if you don't exist to wear a t-shirt? No. If you want to wear a t-shirt, I'm sorry, but you have to exist first. That should be simple stuff, right? It's common sense. If you don't exist, you can't do it because you don't exist. Pretty straightforward. So if you want to think about anything, if you want to have thoughts, guess what? You exist first. Otherwise you can't think. That means you can't be thinking. You can't be thoughts. You can't be anything that's conceptual or within the mind. That means you have to exist before the mind. That means your consciousness. Not thoughts, consciousness. Alright? Paul goes on to say, concerning the you have to exist before thought, there are a whole lot of people who will tell you that you is nothing but a bunch of nerve endings in your brain. They grow into existence first, and then at a certain stage they shot off the right electrical impulses in the right pattern, and then you came into existence. Well, sorry bro, but that's not how I came into existence, because I exist separate from my thoughts prior to my thoughts, because I'm a thinking being, and I can think. That means I can't come from my thinking, or from my brain. I have to exist before my brain existed. Otherwise I wouldn't be aware of my brain. But by the sounds of it, you're not aware of your own brain. You can't think. So it makes sense. Maybe that's why you're struggling to understand something so simple. That you can't be something a product of your brain. I exist before my brain existed. Otherwise, how would I think with my brain and use my brain? The same way you can't drive a car if the car doesn't exist. Oh, sorry, you can't drive a car if you don't exist first to hop in the car and drive it. So you can't have a brain, and you can't fucking think unless you exist as a spirit before your brain existed in order to use your brain. But if you think you're a part of the brain, or you think your thoughts, no wonder you're not very good at thinking. That would be like trying to drive a car while thinking you're the car. That's crazy. You'd be crashing everywhere, alright? If you could even start the bloody thing and accelerate at all. But if you think you're your brain, if you think you're a thought, you're an idea, or you only exist in your mind, right? And you're not the consciousness, you're not a spirit that exists external and before your brain existed and came into being, to be able to use your brain, well then that's why you struggle to think. That's why you have a hard time thinking. Because you're not using your brain. You think you are your brain. You think you are actually your brain and thoughts. Do you see how that must make it very hard to actually use your brain as an external tool to yourself? Like how you hop in a car and you use that vehicle? In the same way you should be using your brain as a tool to think with. But if you think you exist inside of your brain, holy fuck bro, you're on another level of insanity. Obviously you have to be the spirit that exists before the brain. Otherwise you can't think. Oh fuck me. This is simple stuff, but people are so dumb in this age. Like, ancient Greek philosophers figured this out over 2,000 years ago. Why are people not, like, still struggling to just understand basic things about existence? So Paul goes on to say, mess with those nerves or the electricity and you go bye-bye. If these nerves turn off and then can come back on again, your absence is temporary. Turn them off for good and your absence is forever. In either case, you're just as equally gone. Now, to be sure, you're not any single cell. Instead, you are the electrical interaction of millions of them. Not a thing, but a process that comes from a bunch of things. Again, I've already gone over about 5 times so far how that is impossible. It doesn't make any sense. It can't work like that. Sorry. So you can just keep repeating it, but it's been proven wrong. Materialism doesn't work. It's stupid. Okay? Even science doesn't back up materialism. It backs up what I'm saying. Oh, fuck. Now, if you want to believe in something more than that, you can, but it's called faith. Why would you choose a faith that teaches that yourself is an unthinking something that can exists in mental oblivion? I have no idea. My, Paul, that was a tongue twister. Seems to me that without thought, yourself is no more useful than the dirt that your brain cells came from and will someday return. Well, that sounds very, very inspiring. And they are wrong. This can be proven simply by just looking at our own experience right now. See, that's another thing here, right? Anybody listening this far? I'm not putting across any ideas. I'm not saying anything that you can't just check for yourself right now. You think I'm wrong? Well, look at your own experience right now. You have a self, and then you have thoughts afterwards. And if you stop thinking, you still exist. Just check, just have a look. It's not hard, just don't think for a split second. And holy shit, did you pop out of existence? No, bro, you didn't pop out of existence, cunt. Alright? You still exist even if you're not thinking. Alright? I'm sorry. But anybody can test it. Just right now, don't think for 5 seconds, alright? Let's do it together. I don't know about you. That wasn't 5 seconds, it was less than 5 seconds, but I don't know about you. But I didn't stop existing. I didn't pop out of existence into some fucking oblivion, different dimension, and then pop back into this dimension. Alright? I was just sitting here the whole time. not thinking. But I'm still just sitting here. Like, you don't just pop into another fucking dimension when you stop thinking. Holy fuck, materialists. What the hell? Like, just seriously, anybody. Tell me right now, in your own experience, have you ever had times in your life where you just don't think for a couple of seconds? Like, you just look at something and you're not thinking, you're just like looking like, Oh, and then you're daydreaming or something, you just have a mind blank. And then you get back to your thinking. Or, have you, like, throughout your entire life, constantly popped in and out of existence, teleporting to different dimensions? Which one sounds more logical? Which one's something that happens to you in your everyday normal life? Do you sometimes have moments where you have a mind blank? Or do you have moments where you pop in and out of different fucking dimensions and teleport to different dimensions, cunt? Obviously, nobody's teleporting to other fucking dimensions. We just have mind blanks every now and again when we stop thinking. We don't stop existing. We don't pop out of this fucking universe and come back. Like, come on. Goddamn materialists. How can you not see that that makes no sense? Obviously, you have to be a spirit that exists prior to and separate from your mind. You don't pop in and out of different fucking dimensions, cunt. Holy shit. Any thoughts known are known by your own self, which is knowing them. Else you couldn't be there to know them. Even ideas of yourself are known by yourself, which cannot be an idea. Think of how a radio works. Breaking the radio or removing the batteries temporarily doesn't kill or end the radio waves. Only the radio or the body is affected. Paul says, the music is dead. Temporarily take out the batteries and the music is dead temporarily. Break the radio and the music is dead forever. Well, no, just get a new radio and turn that on and it's going to play the same radio station, Paul. Paul says, you are the music. The radio without the music is a clump of plastic and wire of no more value to anyone than the dirt in your backyard. Paul loves comparing stuff to dirt. Apparently dirt has no value. Obviously, you've never been an agriculturalist, Paul, because dirt is one of the most valuable things on this planet. Alright? It's just funny to me. As an agriculturalist, somebody who actually has worked on farms and whatnot, in production of food sources, and even with certain companies who, work on new innovations and technology for agriculture, as an individual who works in these types of fields occasionally, when I have the time, I actually understand that dirt is one of the most valuable things on the planet. So, I don't know, I just find it funny when people compare things to dirt and trying to show that they don't have value. It's like, oh, you're worth as much as the dirt under my feet. It's like, what, more than gold? Literally worth more than gold, bro. Yeah, cheers. Like, cause dirt is worth more than gold. You do know that. Like, in the real world, good quality dirt is literally worth more than gold. Because you can grow food in it. And if you don't have food, you die. Like, I don't know. Side tangent, but yeah. It's funny when people try to say that dirt is of low value. They obviously don't know much about life or how life actually works outside of their bedroom. If you stepped outside and knew the real world, and had some life experience, you'd know that dirt was one of the most valuable things on the planet. The music is the mortal life. So when Paul was saying that we are the music, playing from the radio, blah, blah, and if the radio dies, then we die because the music stops. Well, no. The music is the mortal life, right, of the being. So your life as a human, your life in your body, that's the music that's played through the radio. Me talking right now, this is music playing through my radio. But your eternal self, behind that, which is an all-pervasive wave, which animated the music, okay? So you, as a person, your body, and everything you say and do is like a radio playing music. But you, the actual self, that has always been the same throughout your entire life and has never changed, that's actually radio waves that animate and give life to the radio, okay? So that's your spirit, who you are, and then as a spirit, you use your body and mind, like how you drive a car, alright? The spirit is the driver, the body is the vehicle. The same way the radio works. And so if you break the radio, well, no music's coming out, alright? You'll be a vegetable, you'll be retarded or something, okay? Or you'll die. You're dead. No more mortal life. You're gone, dead. But you, as a spirit, the actual radio waves, they don't break. When you break the radio, the music stops, but the radio waves are still there in the background. You just don't see them anymore. You can't hear them anymore because the radio is not filtering the radio waves into music. So in the same way, when your body dies, there's no mind there, there's no person talking anymore because your spirit isn't being filtered through that body. So the exact same way that radio works with the music, that's your body and mind, and then your soul, your spirit, yourself is the exact same way as the radio waves, which animate and give life to and use that object to express yourself and life. So the music is really just a filtration of the wave into a limited band. And that's why in Christianity, they say, it's taught and Christ taught that we are the children of God. Because God is everyone and everything, and we're the radios who play the radio station of God's word and God's message. So we tune our radio to pick up the radio station of God, and then God's spirit dwells in us. In the same way, when you change a radio station and you pick up a different radio station, that radio station plays through that radio. So if you tune in as a radio into the actual station, the right frequency to pick up the Holy Spirit, right, then you become a vessel of God, and you play that will of God through your independent being, which is playing the radio station of the kingdom. So that's what it means to be a Christian. So even the Greek philosophers figured this out over 2,000 years ago. Christ taught this himself. This is what Christianity is all about. All right? This is stuff folk have understood for thousands of years. Catch up. Catch up. You're all slow. Paul goes on to say, if you want to believe in eternal self, that's fine. Most people do. But that's faith, not reason. Oh my God. But if that's what you want to believe, then the next question is, what are radio waves that you keep referring to? If they come from outside the radio, where do they come from and what generates them? So I don't believe in an eternal self. I know an eternal self and can prove the existence of an eternal self. It's not mere faith, my friend. The radio waves can either be called self or consciousness. The ancient Greek philosophers called the radio waves divine reason or the mind of God. Again, in Christianity, the radio wave is called the Father. And a radio who is tuned in and born again in the spirit has just turned to that radio station called the Father, and now they're playing that music called the will of God instead of their own selfish will, which was the prior radio station they once played. And to deny thyself is to turn off that radio station and turn the radio station to the will of God. That's all it means. Paul says, if the self is consciousness, how does that not involve thinking? Have you ever been conscious and not been thinking? Yes, all the time. Most of the time, actually. Most people are. And how can you prove your eternal self? Do you have any memories of your eternal self before you were born? Well, I know myself right now, so pretty much. So I say, Paul, no answer I give you will truly satisfy you. You have to check for yourself. But yes, one can be without thought and conscious of this. It requires some form of meditation or turning in of one's attention towards attention itself. If you are doubtful that meditation is a viable experience, to be still without thought, just being, then you won't really be able to understand, as you are used to living only in your thoughts. Surely there is something you do to just relax and observe and soak in your surroundings without analysis and categorization. Do you ever just sit and watch the sunset? Do you enjoy the refreshing feeling of water splashing on your face? You know, moments of love and passion which stutter your thought and make you speechless? You know, those times that you feel alive? And the you that you are now, it's not a different you to when you were 5, and then 10, and 20, and so on. Or is it not a different? Yet something you know intuitively as your own self, it's been there the whole time. Even your personality can change dramatically as we age. Yet our self is still the same self behind it all. If you have this sense of self which is unchanged by the changes throughout life, then where did it begin and where could it end? If it was to begin with the birth of the body and was some construction of formed minds and thoughts, then as the mind developed, so too would this constructed self. And there is a kind of self we create in our thoughts, a projection and narrative of our life and who we are, which does arise from our minds and thoughts. But we are still left with this unchanging self behind this, which knows this and is aware of this shifting idea of ourselves. Paul goes on to say, if you believe this is meaningful to your life, then I wish you success with it. I also do meditation and find not thinking really to be nothing more than thinking about not thinking. The thoughts come naturally, and it's a mental effort to keep them out. So meditators use rhythmic sounds, but they're really thinking about the sounds, so they can block out substantive thought. So overall, what you believe is a belief, and it's faith. It's your subjective evaluation of your own experiences. But this is not a value judgment, but it is what it is. Yeah, so if you have only gone as far as thinking about not thinking, then my observation was spot on. I'm 100% correct, Paul, you just proved me right. As I said, this is one thing, the one thing stopping you from following and being able to grasp this provable truth. And to the point that Paul keeps falling back towards, which is this is a form of denial. All right, this is a classic form of materialist denial. It's also the most common form of atheist denial. Is they just want to say, oh, that's a belief. That's what you believe, man. You just believe. That's your faith. Yeah, right, brother. You want to believe in the spirit and this and that. Okay, that's your belief. No. This is a proven position. Science backs up this position. Philosophy and logical proofs definitely establish it as a valid truth of reality. But the common response to this proof is just, oh, nah, I deny it. That's just what you believe, man. So I just sum it up real simple here. No, it is a provable reality, as we already covered, and you admitted above, Paul, that you are unable to be aware of this provable truth as you fail to cease to think, as Paul just admitted himself here. I also do meditation and find not thinking really to be nothing more than thinking about not thinking. So Paul hasn't actually ever just had a moment of conscious awareness and actually used his brain. He's been lost in his brain his entire life. He's addicted to thinking. So addicted, he's such a junkie of thinking and the thoughts in his mind that he can't even experience one little break. He can't take one moment away from those constant hits because he's a junkie and he needs the hits. He needs to think. And a lot of people in this day and age, they are in this way. They're very addicted to thinking. They've never just sat around for like 10 minutes and not thought and just enjoyed their existence. They're constantly thinking about something. This is a sickness. This is an addiction that people need to heal themselves from. And Paul here admits this. That he's trying to get free of this addiction to thinking. Otherwise he wouldn't ever have tried meditation. But clearly Paul he's even interested in these types of metaphysical ideas. So he clearly has some type of interest in knowing himself separate to his thoughts. Otherwise he wouldn't bother with meditation. But he's tried. But he's that addicted to his thoughts that he struggles. And he can't seem to break free of that addiction. And he admits it here. And I say, you are unable to be aware of this provable truth, as you fail to cease to think. If you put in the effort to achieve this, you would wholeheartedly be agreeing with me. So there you have it, folks. You can easily use scientific proofs to back up this position, numerous logical proofs to establish this as a valid truth of reality. And as it's been explained, and as it should be evident for anybody who's starting to have any type of slight grasp of this subject, the one thing where people fault and they hinder themselves in understanding this reality, this provable truth, that we are a spirit, consciousness, self, and we don't come from our mind or brain, we use the mind and brain, is because these individuals, as Paul admits here himself, are too addicted to thinking to actually break free of that and actually experience themselves without being lost in their addictions. So that's why I do what I do with this type of thing: metaphysical, philosophical understandings, theological understandings and teachings. Because this is what it all ties down to fundamentally. All religions, all theologies, all philosophies, this is the sum of it, that human beings get addicted to thinking. They get addicted to their minds and their thoughts. And then they lose sight of reality and their spirit, which is eternal and exists beyond their minds and their temporary bodies. And then they get real crazy and depressed and upset, and because they think they're actually just minds, they're just people, just bodies, and they die and that's it. They don't have any connection to their eternal life, their eternal spirit. Again, which is provable, even backed by science, everything. It's simple stuff. But people even here admit that they struggle with understanding this simple thing about themselves because they're addicted to their thoughts. So I'm all about trying to heal people, trying to spread awareness and love so folk can actually go free of their addictions and their self-harm. And the whole world can be a little bit better for everybody. So take it easy. Work and remember to not be addicted to your thinking. You don't want to end up a thought junkie like most people. It's the worst addiction on the planet, #1 addiction. It's worse than it's worse than heroin, it's worse than anything else. Worse than sugar addiction, literally. Almost everybody in your life has some form of addiction to thinking. Everyone you know. Not everyone you know is a heroin addict, but everyone you know is addicted to thinking or has been addicted to thinking at some point in their life. Every human being on this planet right now has at some point in their life been a junkie to thinking. A literal junkie addicted to thinking at some point. Every single human being alive today. The biggest and most important addiction on the planet that humans need to face so that we can make the world a better place. Thinking, thoughts, in order to know ourselves, in order to be able to even think properly and actually use our brains as a functional tool that's efficient. So, there you go, folks. Take it easy. Enjoy yourselves and just, I don't know, take it easy. Enjoy your being while you still have it. Stop chasing the dragon of your thoughts, you junky cunts.